Yu-Gi-Oh can be an incredibly expensive game to play, but with a little patience, you can build a competitively viable deck without becoming a whale. Back in 2022, Konami released the Albaz Strike Structure deck, which helped me get back into the game. 2 years later, it's still a solid way to get into the game while slowly building up its competitive power. Our plan is to go from this to this, a fully competitive build of the branded Despia strategy without breaking the bank. Only spending up to $15 a week buying singles, packs, and trading, we are going to prove that you can still have a good time with this game while playing branded on a budget. Hello everyone, my name is Cole, and welcome back to another episode of Branded on a Budget. We are here, episode 3 of Branded on a Budget, and today we are going to be talking a little bit about what we did with our previous deck list and how it worked and how things didn't work. And also, I want to talk a little bit about just playing the deck better in general. And so, with that, we will be, of course, adding things to our deck. We've got a hefty stack of cards to be adding to our deck, swapping things out. But that said, this is roughly a $15 stack of cards, so we will not be pulling another potentially Lubellion out of a mega pack. So we're gonna have to hold that for later. That'll be maybe next episode. I don't know. I'm very curious on how I'm going to be going about getting these Lubellions and these more expensive cards. That said, we did get confirmation that Guiding Quem the Virtuous will be in the next Megaton, so here's hoping that it's a relatively affordable card at that point. Because it's more or less the last thing that we really need for our deck. I mean, we need Branded Opening, we need Lubellion, and Quem. Those are pretty much the big ticket items, barring some of the things that we're adding today. But we won't talk about that just yet. We're going to set those off to the side for now. I want to talk a little bit about last week's performance, specifically against that Tenpai duel that we had. So, as you saw, we definitely had that little misplay with the rivalry of the Warlord, thinking it was there can be only one. That's not what I'm talking about though today. Today I want to talk about when I used Branded in White with Kit and Albaz to make a Lubellion. So I got thinking about this in hindsight. He had the Imperm, and granted, like everything in hindsight's 2020, right? So I couldn't have made this decision on the fly. That said, I think I could have played that better. I think my end goal should not have been Mirror Jade, because in hindsight, I don't know how much Mirror Jade really does against Tenpai. I honestly think I probably should have tried to make Rinbrum. I think Rinbrum would have been a much better pick in that situation, especially given the circumstances. I could have ended on a Rinbrum, and the Imperm wouldn't have done anything on my turn anyway. I guess he could have Impermed at the start of his next turn. I don't know if that's what they would have done, but it could have been a potential regardless. Dropping the Lubellion and passing was obviously the worst play that could have been done. I probably should have made the Rinbrum. And so, with that said, keep in mind that there are so many ways, so many lines you can use with this deck that you want to keep your mind open to all of them. I don't know if I know I talked about it, I think last week, how I added Rinbrum as the potential send-off of Mirror Jade so I could special summon Albaz and get a super poly kind of a thing. That's not great all the time, and it's super phenomenal, but because I was so hyper-focused on that, I totally missed the opportunity to summon Rinbrum and potentially do some damage on their next turn and potentially get a game win. That said, everything else pretty much functioned as I'd hoped it would. Tragedy is phenomenal. Ad libitum of Despia is still super good. There is one Despia card that I added in that I wasn't super sure about, and that was Dramaturge Despia. And in hindsight, once again, hindsight's 2020. I guess that's the theme of this episode, is that hindsight's 2020. Dramaturge isn't the greatest, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. And as a result, we will be swapping it out with some things that are definitely more usable in my opinion. In fact, that's kind of the goal of this episode, is to make... I know last episode was more of trying to be able to not just end on Mirror Jade. This time, it's even more so dedicated to not just trying to end on a Mirror Jade. We've got a bunch of cards to throw into the mix that should help with that. It won't necessarily help us to play out of like hand traps, like if they Ash Blossom our Branded Fusion. We're still kind of rocky there, but in theory, if we do get ashed, we should have other follow-up plays to go into with the rest of this pile. So without further ado, let's talk about the things we're going to be dropping. Starting with the extra deck things. We've got Sprint the Iron Dash Dragon. Now Sprint is a great card. I just think it's kind of overstated its longevity in this deck. I don't necessarily think it's a bad card like I just said. It can be super good, especially if you have like a super polymerization build of the Branded Despia deck. That's not where I'm heading towards with this build of Despia, but it's a very good option. So keep in mind, Sprint could be a good thing if that's what you want to do, like a board breaker kind of build of the deck. Our third copy of Mirror Jade did not come up this last week, and I think it's time to go down to just 2 copies of Mirror Jade. Same with Albion. We don't necessarily need the 3 copies of Albion. And our 2 copies of Titaniclad, as fun as it was when it did come up, I don't think it's going to be coming up much more in the future when we have other things to go into instead. I do want to make note that I still have 2 copies of Lubellion, the Searing Dragon, in our extra deck, and that's simply because we do not have the main deck Lubellion in our deck to fuse with. So we almost will always be going into Lubellion first, using a Dark Target with Albaz to fuse with Branded Fusion. We will have light options to go into Albion if need be, but Lubellion almost always will be our first fusion target, our first fusion monster that we make. I don't know if that's making sense. Hopefully it is. So for now, we will be keeping 2, just in case something happens to the other one, so we can be able to go into the next one. So these 4 will be our extra deck cards that we are dropping this episode, and I think it's also time we start pivoting out of our hand trap board breakery strategy. So we will be dropping our 3 Effect Veilers, our 2 Ghost Ogres, and currently our 3 Kaijus. I will say Effect Veiler and even Ghost Ogre to some extent has carried a lot of weight in our deck, and even the Kaijus have been super good to us. But we've got more potential power that we can do, more potential things that have better synergies with our deck, and we know that Branded is not necessarily a hand trap deck. It can be if you really want to build it that way. I just don't necessarily think that we need to do it that way. With as long as I've been playing the deck, I've been able to tell that hand traps are kind of... You don't really want to see them in your opening hand. You'd rather have a bunch of gas in your opening hand. So this is where we're going to be dropping from our board breaker-esque hand trap extra things. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be dropping Dramaturge. It can have potential. I will completely say it will have potential. It's not necessarily a bad card, as I was saying prior. I just don't necessarily know if we need it right now. It might be something we want to test in the future, but for right now, I don't think we need it. And the same goes for our copy. We still have 2 copies of Kit in the deck. We're going to be dropping one of them right now, just for a potential other normal summon that we will be adding to our deck. And then our second copy of Brandon White will also be going. So we're going to keep 1 copy of Brandon White, more so just a test with for now. And that takes us to the next thing that I want to talk about, and it's that our deck will be bumping up to 41 cards instead of 40. Now, 40 cards to 41 is not a huge change, and mostly it's because I didn't want to give up the second copy of Branded Lost. I want to try to run 2 copies of Branded Lost still for the time being, because we do not have the Lubellion. We don't have an easy way to get Branded Lost onto the field. So the amount of times we've been opening Branded Lost and being able to use Branded Lost and Branded Fusion, it's been awesome, and I've been loving it. So we're going to keep 2 copies of Branded Lost for now. And with that out of the way, let's talk about the things that we will be adding into our deck. Starting out with 3 extra deck monsters. First up, we've got Predaplant Dragos Tapelia. Now, Dragos Tapelia is a phenomenal branded card. I mean, it's a Predaplant, but we treat it as a branded card a lot of the times nowadays. It does so much good work for our deck. We just didn't have a lot of ways to get to it. Sure, we could make it with Branded and White. We could make it with Branded and Red. We could even make it off of like a Lubellion or Albion fusion effect, but it's not necessarily something we want to go into. More often than not, Branded and Red gets us Chimera. Our Albions, Lubellions, they make the Mirror Jades. So we didn't really have super great ways to get to Dragos Tapelia. We do now. Same goes with Magnum the Reliever. Now, I've not used Magnum Reliever that much in my main build of Branded. I want to try it out. I want to see what kind of things it can do, and with some other cards later on we'll be talking about that we're adding in, I feel like there's a lot more synergies with it. So keep that in mind. Now, Alba Lenitus is just another Albaz fusion. It can be a Mirror Jade Send, which is super great, which can get us to things like Branded Fusion. However, I have a Tenpai player at my locals, and I want to be able to break their board by normal setting the Albaz to my field and just blowing up their board. So we'll be adding the Alba Lenitus. As you remember, we took out 3 extra deck monsters. So our 4th extra deck monster is actually Grand Guignol the Dusk Dragon. Thank you to the new Terminal Revenge that we were able to get Grand Guignol for a pretty decent price. And granted, this is the Ultra from Photon-Nova, but I digress. We're also able to get 2 copies of Cartesia to go with that Grand Guignol. Cartesia is going to be one of our main players in the deck from here on out. Because of Cartesia, we are able to do so much more stuff with this branded deck. Like I was saying, make the Predaplant, Dragostapelia, or even the the Magnum Reliever. Wrong Magna in my head, I guess. But yes, I thought about bumping up to 3. For now, we're going to stick with 2, especially because we don't have Quem. It probably will be bumped up to 3 at some point, so keep that in mind. But 2 for right now, especially because of our next card, which is 3 copies of Fusion Deployment. Fusion Deployment is super great for getting our Cartesia out, and it can also do some cheeky things like get out our Felon of Albaz and blow up our opponent's board by fusion summoning with their cards. So that's one more way to essentially go second, is with Fusion Deployment. And of course, going first, it gets us our Cartesia, or even going second can get us a Cartesia if we want that route. I also felt like it was time to add in Branded in High Spirits. We still play 3 copies of Albion. We don't necessarily have the Bestials yet, but 3 copies of Albion as well as some of our Albazes can really do some clever things Branded in High Spirits, and adding the Cartesias along with the Grand Guignol is more or less a last option that we don't really want to do, but it's an option that we can do nonetheless. Last thing we have is the Fright Fur package. The Edgem Chain, 2 copies of Fright Fur Patchwork, and 2 copies of Polymerization. Now back in the day when I was building Branded, as I was like originally building Branded, before I got to Quem, before I got Lubellion, much so in the same state we are right now, even before I had Cartesia, because back then Cartesia was sillily expensive, I did jump on the Edgem Chain for my Branded Despia deck list, and I love it. I really like it. Because of this, we're going to start looking into things like Allure of Darkness later on, but right now, just having the Edgem Chain package, the Fright Fur package, whatever you want to call it, the Polymerizations really go clutch with Guardian Chimera. This little package is going to help us to essentially play more. If they Ash Blossom our Branded Fusion, we can play more. We can even bait out things like Ash Blossom with our Edgem Chain package by searching the chain or the Fright Fur package or the Fright Fur Patchwork or the Polymerization, you know, whatever thing you're searching for. I think these are the ratios for the package, by the way. I think it's 2-2-2. I don't think you do 2-1-2 or a 3-2-2 or something like that. I think this is the optimal package size for ratios. I don't think you go any more or less. Edgem Chain, super great. It's one of the greatest things to add to the deck as well, because it can be used as like a discard, and that'll get you the Fright Fur engine going, and it's a great discard because of that. Not discard, but send from hand. And yeah, I just honestly think it is super good, especially now that we're adding more things that are that aren't branded cards to our extra deck, like Dragostapelia and Magnum the Reliever, as well as our Guardian Chimera that we added last week. That's not in that pile. Hopefully I picked it up out of this. Nope. It's literally the last one, yeah. Also, because of our Guardian Chimera, we can make that with Polymerization, and then we can make it on our turn. Instead of using Branded in red, then we can attack with it if we need to. Or, like, if it's a going second, for example, we can use Polymerization to make Guardian Chimera destroy something on their side of the field. It's super good. I need to do some testing with this list. However, I think that this is definitely the list we'll be using going forward. I think that is honestly very, very good. There are some things I'd love to have changed. I'd love some branded opening. Obviously, I've been talking about it for 2 episodes in a row now. I want Lubellion, but we don't have it yet. And sadly, we're going to have to wait another episode to see what's inside of this pack to see if we have a Lubellion in here. Because like I said, this is roughly $15, including shipping. Here's the prices on the screen. I know somebody asked about it last time, but yeah, I have it on the screen right here, so take a look. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and sleeve up our cards and pull out a test hand and see what we can get done with, hopefully with our new cards instead of just drawing a bunch of old cards. I'd love to show you what we can do with Cartesia or even Fusion Deployment, and especially the Frightfur package. I love it. I want you to see some cool things we can do with it. So let's get into it. Alright, here is our deck list. We've got 3 copies of Aluber the Jester, we got 2 copies of Spriggan's Kit, 2 copies of the new Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous, 3 copies of Albaz, 3 copies of Albion the Shrouded Dragon, 1 Despian Tragedy, 1 Ad Libitum of Despia, 2 copies of Tri-Brigade Mercourier, 3 copies of Branded Fusion, 2 copies of Branded Lost, 1 branded in white, 1 branded in red, 1 branded in High Spirit, 1 branded Retribution, 3 copies of Fusion Deployment, and then the Edge of Chain package. We got 2 Edge of Chains, 2 Frightfur Patchworks, 2 Polymerizations, 3 Dark Ruler No Mores if we're going second, and we're so good we always will be drawing this just like we did last episode. 1 copy of Called By, 1 copy of Foolish Burial, 1 copy of Gold Sarcophagus. And as for our extra deck, we've got 2 copies of Mirror Jade, 2 copies of Albion, 2 copies of Lubellion. Like I said, we'll probably be going into that a lot, so we don't want to bump down to just 1 just yet. We got 1 copy of Titaniclad, 1 copy of Rindbrum, 1 copy of the new Alba Lenitus, the Abyss Dragon, 1 copy of a new Grand Guignol, the Dusk Dragon, 1 Despian Querites, 1 Masquerade, the Blazing Dragon, 1 Guardian Chimera, 1 Predaplant, Dragos Tapelia, and 1 Magnum the Reliever. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and shuffle these cards up and do a test hand. At this point, we've taken out every single one of our light targets from like going off of the Branded Fusion, such as like our Ghost Ogre, Effect Veiler, and the Kaiju, and now we are limited to only Blazing Cartesia, which is essentially our only light target left in the deck. It's not necessarily something we're going to be going into every single time, but it is definitely an option, so we want to have at least one of those in the deck. Granted, I also like playing with 2 because Cartesia has such a great discard effect. Or not discard, it's got such a great end phase effect where you can add it back to your hand and it can become a discard fodder during your opponent's turn if you have like an Albaz to summon on board. And so I am still, like I said, a little bit undecided if I want to go ahead and do 3 copies of Cartesia, but for now we're going to stick with 2 and see where it goes. Hopefully by next episode we'll have Lubellion. I won't make any promises. Next episode might just be opening up packs of cards and maybe adding 1 or 2 cards that are actually like specific cards to add to the list. I feel like we've been just buying singles essentially, so I want to do some other things like opening up cards. And if we're lucky enough to get what we're looking for, or potentially trade fodder that we can trade for what we're looking for. So keeping that in mind, we're going to be playing around with this list and adding and removing some cards here and there, probably for this episode. We have the list here, and then next episode might be more of the same in hopes of potentially getting more stuff to add into. Just keeping all that in mind, I don't know what to say. I just wanted to let you guys know that that's kind of the plan going forward. That said, we got 2, like I said, looping back to the beginning, we got 2 light targets. Like, we probably won't always be Branded Fusion making Albion. It'll be typically Lubellion, which is why we have the 2 left in the extra deck. Anyway, let's go ahead and cut our deck. We'll draw our 5 cards. Hopefully they are good ones so we can see what we can do with this deck after adding in some new things. Our hand is Dark Ruler, Polymerization, Edge of Chain, Blazing Cartesia, and Aluber the Jester. It's not probably the most craziest hand you've ever seen, but it's not bad at all either. Having Edge of Chain in hand is great. Having Polymerization is great because it's not a once per turn, so that's super, super cool. And if we were going second, like I said, we're always drawing the Dark Ruler. Dark Ruler is just glued to our hands, and I'm loving it. I'm very happy with that. I do like Forbidden Droplet a ton, but hey, Dark Ruler's been coming in clutch as you've seen in the last 2 episodes. Anyway, since this is our turn, we can't necessarily have the Cartesia on board since we don't have fusion deployment. We are fairly susceptible to an imperm or an effect veiler. We'll pretend like we've got no interruptions. We'll go normal summon Aluber, search for a copy of Branded Fusion. We go ahead and activate the Branded Fusion, sending the Albaz. And here is an interesting one. We could send Tragedy, or we could send Ad Libitum. And we know that we want to end with a Branded in red on our board, so it's a little bit up in the air what you want to do here. We've got the Cartesia in our hand, so we can easily make a Grand Guignol and send the Ad Libitum. And as of right now, Grand Guignol's effect, we don't really have a lot of things to send. We don't need to send a Titaniclad to get a Guiding Quim on board. We could use it to send the Albion to the grave, and then we could have a potential Mirror Jade at the start of our opponent's turn. So keeping those in mind, we probably want to use the Ad Libitum right here so we can get Ad Libitum into the graveyard right away. Those two fuse into Lubellion. New effect, Lubellion effect, and we can do something fun here by discarding our Edge of Chain and do the Lubellion effect to fuse. So we don't have a light target here other than the Cartesia in our hand, but we want to keep the Cartesia in our hand, so we'll go right into Mirror Jade, shuffling back the Lubellion and the Albaz in our grave. And then we can go Edge of Chain effect to search for a Fight for Patchwork since it was sent to the graveyard, grabbing the Patchwork, activating the Patchwork to add a copy of Polymerization and Edge of Chain. We opened up both of those, so that's the reason why you want to play 2 of them, just in case you do open them. And our hand is starting to look pretty dang stacked from here. Okay, so it's not as pretty as we would like it to be. We don't have an Albaz in graveyard, so we can't special summon the Cartesia, and we already used our normal summon on the Aluber. And so, luckily, we've got 2 copies of Polymerization in hand, so we can do some things like this. Activate the Polymerization, sending the Edge of Chain and the Blazing Cartesia to the graveyard to make a copy of Grand Guignol, the Dusk Dragon. Grand Guignol's effect can send a level 6 or higher light or dark monster from our deck or our extra deck. In this case, we're going to be sending our copy of Albion, the Branded Dragon. Next, we can go another copy of Polymerization, fusing the Grand Guignol and the Aluber to make one of something. Honestly, this could be a number of different things. We can make the Predaplant Dragos Tapelia with this. We can make our Masquerade so they can get burnt for their effects by 600 points. We probably wouldn't want to make a Despine Querites for another reason because of the Grand Guignol on our graveyard, and we'll get to that in a second. And that is more or less it, unless we can do Magnum. And we can't use Magnum the reliever right away because we didn't have anything left in hand. So honestly, our best option is probably Predaplant Dragos Tapelia, unless you specifically wanted to make Masquerade to get the burn damage. So keeping that in mind, that's something you could do. So our end board looks like this. We've got a Monster Negate and a non-targeting Banish. But in our end phase, we can activate the Albion effect to set a copy of Branded in red to our side of the field, and we can activate our Cartesia's effect in the graveyard to add it back to our hand since a fusion monster entered the graveyard. So we have another monster in our hand to use with Branded in red if we need, or we can have it as a discard for some other reason. If we potentially had an Albaz in our graveyard, we could use it as a discard to fuse with Albaz. So I want to talk quickly about Grand Guignol the Dusk Dragon for a little bit. It's got an interesting effect where it can banish itself from the field or the graveyard to special summon one Dogmatica monster from our deck or one Despia monster from our extra deck, barring its fusion requirements. So this comes up. This actually is very interesting. If we had Guiding Quim the Virtuous, we can special summon her from our deck, and if we need to, we can special summon our Despine Querites from our extra deck, which is typically what ends up coming up the most. Unless especially right now because we don't have Quim. However, there is one stipulation with Grand Guignol. If a monster is special summoned by your opponent's activated monster effect, except during the damage step, you can banish this card and then perform that effect. So that needs to happen. A monster needs to be special summoned by another monster's effect. So keeping that in mind, that's something we can do, and we can cheat out of our extra deck a copy of Despine Querites, which can then make all of our opponent's monsters' attacks go down to 0. So that's a fun little thing, a fun little interaction to keep in mind. And from here, that is more or less our turn. We end with a monster negate, a non-targeting banish, non-hard once per turn, and a branded in red, which can target the ad libitum in our graveyard, add it to our hand, and either, depending on what we need to destroy either 1 or 2 cards in their field, or if we want to draw more on our side, we can use 2 cards in our hand, the Cartesian, the Adlib, or 2 cards on our field, the Dragostapelia and the Mirror Jade. In this case, we'll just keep the Cartesian hand just to show. Theoretically, you would have used the Dragostapelia effect by now to monster negate. You would banish these guys to summon the Guardian Chimera. You'd go Guardian Chimera Chainlink 1, Ad libitum Chainlink 2 to target the Mirror Jade and special summon it back to your field. And boom, now we have 2 Mirror Jade effects. You've got your pop. In this case, it would have been two cards on the field you could pop with Guardian Chimera, and you would draw 1 as well. So just like that, because of our extra copies of Polymerization and having a Cartesia to make Grand Guignol, in this case, now Cartesia is phenomenal to have on our side of the field during our opponent's turn, and we want that a lot of the times. But in this case, we didn't, so we were able to make a Grand Guignol to send some things to the graveyard and get some more of stuff off of it. So instead of just making a Mirror Jade and then maybe going into Guardian Chimera, we can do some other things like have a Dragostapelia on board. We can have multiple Mirror Jade effects very easily on our opponent's turn, as well as the Guardian Chimera. And of course, there's other things as well. If we have Cartesia on our side of the field during our opponent's turn, it is a quick effect to fusion summon. You can fusion summon into something like a Magnum Reliever or the Dragostapelia, or heck, even the Guardian Chimera. If you want a big body, I don't recommend making a Guardian Chimera with Cartesia because you won't get its effects. But hey, if you really want to just make a 3300 beat stick, you sure could. One thing also to know about Guardian Chimera is that when a copy of Polymerization is in the graveyard, your opponent cannot target this card with effects. So keep that in mind, because we're playing the Edge of Chain package, we're going to have Polymerization in our graveyard more often than not. So Guardian Chimera gets a little buff because of that package. Now that's just one example of a simple line that will probably end up doing a lot over the next couple of our duels. Keep in mind though, I definitely want Cartesia on our field during our opponent's turn. I want to be able to make that Dragostapelia on our opponent's turn and not our turn. It's not terrible to end on the Dragostapelia, but then it telegraphs to them that they have a monster negate waiting to be used at any time. If we have a Cartesia on board, however, it tells our opponent that, hey, that could be anything, and we don't know what it's going to be, and I'm afraid of that. And that's a lot better than just having exactly what they know to be afraid of. Hopefully that makes sense. But anyway, that is more or less what we got going on this week. Let's go ahead and jump into our locals duels. Alright, so I know I said we're going to go to the locals thing, but I have another combo I want to show you, and I know we just did the test hand. Think of that test hand as more or less a generic end board, your typical end board, your average end board. What I want to show you is something else that I discovered literally the past couple of days thanks to the EU WCQ. On round 11, there was a player playing Branded Despia without Gimmick Puppet, and he did some cool things with Magnum the Reliever. So I want to show you a combo that I don't know if he did this exact combo, but I came up with it, or I copied what he did. Regardless, that dude's a gamer. He knows what he's doing. It was a great match. If you want to watch a really good Branded Despia match, I would watch that. Round 11 of the WCQ. EU WCQ, excuse me. The EU one, not the North America. So, this is the 2-card combo. Aluber and Fright for Patchwork. We're going to assume we're going uninterrupted. This combo is not only killed by Ash Blossom because of Branded Fusion, but it's actually killed by Droll and Lockbird. Now, Droll is typically not a terrible hand trap against us. We can typically play through Droll. This combo specifically does not play through Droll, so keep that in mind. But it's a really good combo. It's a 2-card combo, just Fright for Patchwork and Aluber. We're going to start by normal summoning the Aluber. Aluber effect to search for the Branded Fusion. Add that Branded Fusion to hand. It's ironic that I didn't realize that was on the bottom, but we have that in hand. We can go Fright for Patchwork to add an Edge of Chain and a Polymerization. There's the then the Egypt chain is right there. Those are now in our hand. We can go Branded Fusion, grabbing the Fallen of Albaz and the, where is he? I guess, rather. The Despian Tragedy. To make Lubellion, we'll go Chainlink 1 Lubellion, sending Egypt Chain for cost. Chainlink 2 will be the Despian Tragedy to chain block the Lubellion. I mean, at this point, if they didn't affect Valor, the Luber, I don't know what they're doing. But regardless, chain blocking the Lubellion. So we add an ad libitum from the Despian Tragedy. There's the ad lib. And then this fuses the Albaz and the Lubellion back into their respective decks to summon the Mirror Jade. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. We don't have any setup for our end phase as of right now, but we can go Mirror Jade effect, sending the Albion to the graveyard, banishing our own Aluber. Then we can go Polymerization to fuse the Mirror Jade and the Ad Libitum of Despia. So this is where it can divert. There's two options that, technically three, but mostly two that you'd want to go into potentially. And then there's the third. So, what the dude on stream, I honestly can't remember the name. I apologize for that. I could not remember their name. We have Magnum the Reliever, which is technically a draw one, since we have some fusions in grave, and a what is it called? A destruction, quick effect targeting destruction. We have Predaplant, Dragos Tapelio, which is a targeting monster negate. And then, Masquerade, it's the tax dragon, the burn target, the burn monster, burn effect. What is it, 600 damage? Yeah, 600 damage. So those are our three options. I really do like the Magnum Reliever option, and then Dragos Tapelio is great if you know that your opponent just fails if they get one of their monsters negated. So that is another option. But let's just go into Magnum the Reliever for right now. So we go Magnum Reliever. Then we go Ad Libitum of Despia effect in graveyard to special summon the Mirror Jade back to our field. Put him over here. So now we've got another Mirror Jade online. We have Magnum the Reliever's effect, which can target one fusion or polymerization spell in our graveyard, put it on the bottom of our deck, and then shuffle. Oh, I flubbed. I was supposed to do Egypt Chain effect as well to get the Fright for Patchwork. Forgive me. It'd be the second copy of Fright for Patchwork. So I couldn't even use it this turn, but if you need some more discard for something later on, just do not forget to activate the Egypt Chain effect after you sent it to the graveyard. So there's Patchwork. Yes, Magnum the Reliever. So we can do Polymerization or we can do Branded Fusion. We can put that at the bottom of our deck and then draw one card. Let me just do a weak little shuffle here really quick. There we go. So there's a couple different options. I normally would go for the Branded Fusion here because Polymerization has implications if it's in our graveyard, if we have Guardian Chimera on board. So let's think about it like that. So let's put Branded Fusion on the bottom of our deck and then draw one. It that's in our hand. It doesn't necessarily matter what our draw is. These two cards are essentially just what we are left with in hand, aside from the two cards that we used to get to this combo. So keeping all of that in mind, you still have 3 cards left in your hand, and then this is essentially your end board along with those 3 cards. Plus, you replace the 2 cards, so you essentially, you don't go negative at all. It's just a great combo. In fact, actually, you +2 because you got the 2 monsters on board. Like I said, let's pretend like those cards don't even matter. We can go, in the end phase, we go Albion effect to set the branded in red from our deck to our side of the field. There it is. Setting it. And then on our opponent's turn, we have a couple of different options that we can do. It's not the greatest thing in the world because... Oh, well, okay, let me rephrase that. It is really freaking good. This is a super cool combo that I really like that we can do. But there are some things to keep in mind. We only have 1 copy of Polymerization in graveyard. Depending on which part of the Fright for engine that you open up, either Patchwork or Edge of Chain, it'll kind of vary what you have access to. Right now, I have the Fright for Patchwork, but if I only had the Edge of Chain, then you're a little bit slower in the combo, and you don't. I'll have to think about that. You might end up positive even more. You might have another polymerization in hand. I can't quite remember off the top of my head what it actually ends up being, but I digress. We have Magnum the Reliever, which can banish the polymerization to get the targeting destroy, the targeting pop. We have another Mirror Jade effect, which is online for our opponent's turn, which is great because prior to this, we had to use our Mirror Jade effect on our turn, and then essentially hope that we can get the branded and red going so that we can have another Mirror Jade. This lets us go into our opponent's turn with a Mirror Jade on board. And the best part, in my opinion, is because we used polymerization to fuse our Adlib. Adlib's still in the graveyard, so we have a target for branded and red to target the Adlib back and fuse with what we have to make the Guardian Chimera. And like I said, this is where it gets a little interesting. And of course, Adlib will target the Mirror Jade and bring it back. So we got 2 Mirror Jade effects for our one turn, for our opponent's one turn. Like I said, this is where it gets interesting. If you haven't used the Magnum Reliever pop and polymerization is still in your graveyard, then Guardian Chimera is untargeted. It's untargetable. There we go. You cannot target Guardian Chimera if polymerization is in the graveyard. At least your opponent can't. I'm not sure if you can or not. Your opponent cannot. You sure can. I mean, that doesn't necessarily come up very often, but hey, if it does, it does. But if we have used the Magnum Reliever effect and gotten rid of our polymerization, of course we get the effect, which is great. Guardian Chimera can be targeted, but at this point, you've already done a lot of interruptions where having Guardian Chimera being able to be targeted doesn't necessarily mess up anything on your side of the field. So regardless, if you've banished the polymerization and use the reliever effect or not, you have a pretty dang solid board with just 2 cards. You go +2 because, like I said, you end with 2 monsters. Heck, even +3, I guess, because the branded and red that you set to your side of the field. And then you had 3 other cards, whatever they might have been, in your hand. Maybe you top deck the branded and red, and you could have searched for something like a branded lost or something like that. And then you could, what is it called? You search for the spring and, or Triberg. What am I talking about? Triberg Mercurier. There we go. Search for that or something. Or if you're playing any of the other branded traps like Branded Banishment or Brightest Blazing Branded King, there's some options right there that are really, really freaking good. So that's what I wanted to share with you. Now let's get into our locals. Alright, here we go. The game I've got to show to you today is a branded mirror match of all things. One of my buddies at the local store plays Branded Despia, pretty much at full power. He plays 1 Quem instead of 2. Sometimes people like that, sometimes people don't. Sometimes Quem's just a $50 card, so like it all makes sense. But yes, nonetheless, it's a full power branded essentially. They win the die roll, and they get to go first. And they pretty much go off entirely. They do some crazy things by, starting out with that nice Allure of Darkness by drawing 2 and banishing the Tri-Brigade Mercurier. The Mercurier gets the effect to search, which searches them a copy of Albion, the branded dragon. They activate the Albion, sending a copy of Branded Retribution from the deck to the graveyard. And then they get to draw the card because that card is just way too good. They activate the Branded and High Spirits in their hand, sending the Bestial Sereneer, probably one of the best things to send to the graveyard, as well as a copy of Albion from their extra deck. So not only do they get the end phase search, they get the Bestial Sereneer search, or not search, but send from deck to graveyard right here, which will be a copy of Branded Fusion. I forgot to mention they added the Cartesia off of the Branded High Spirits. But there it is, Branded Fusion. Retribution gets banished so that I can add a copy of Branded Fusion from graveyard to hand. Then they can activate that Branded Fusion by fusioning a copy of Albaz in the graveyard, as well as a Lubellion, the bestial Lubellion, which makes me very, very jealous because we're not there yet. Maybe someday. Anyway, they summon their Albion from their extra deck. They activate the Albion effect to fuse again, using the Albaz in the graveyard as well as the Bestial Sereneer by banishing the two, and then making a copy of Lubellion the Searing Dragon. They activate the Lubellion effect by sending a copy of Allure of Darkness from their hand. They opened up two, isn't that great? Or maybe they drew it off of the other allure, but yeah, they send the allure so they can activate the Lubellion effect. They fuse to make a Mirror Jade by shuffling back the Albaz and the Lubellion. Then they tribute over the Albion on their field to tribute summon the Bestial Lubellion from their graveyard, which sets a copy of Branded Lost. They normal summon the Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous, from their hand and do the fusion stuff to make the Grand Guignol. All things are going according to plan. Luckily for me right here is probably the biggest misplay that my opponent made. They did not activate the Branded Lost to search out the Tri-Brigade Mercurier, which was hugely beneficial to my turn. Anyway, they activate the Branded Opening by sending a card from their hand, which was branded in red, and then they can special summon Guiding Quem the Virtuous from their deck. Quem sends a copy of Albaz from their deck to the graveyard, and now they get the Cartesia effect to add their hand to their end phase, as well as the Albion to set the second copy of Branded in red. Surprisingly, they had two copies of Branded in red. That really caught me off guard. I did not expect that at all. So when they discarded the Branded in red, I thought that was it. But anyway, we go to my turn. I draw for turn. I activate Polymerization. I fuse the Edgem Chain and the Despian Tragedy. Pretty dang solid in my opinion. I make the Masquerade. And then I chain the Tragedy and the Edgem Chain to search me a Fright for Patchwork, as well as a Ad Libitum of Despia. I activate the Fright for Patchwork because why wouldn't I? It's just free cards at that point. I get myself another copy of Polymerization and another copy of Edgem Chain. I go ahead and activate the Branded Fusion that I open in my hand, and I fuse away a copy of Fallen of Albaz and a copy of Blazing Cartesia the Virtuous because I don't have a lot of light targets, and I have the Ad Libitum in my hand, and I use the Tragedy, so I figured this is probably the best route I should go for. Normally, we do go for that Lubellion, but Albion seems like the play here. So I go Albion, and then I fuse with our Chainlink 1 fuse, and they Chainlink 2 branded in red to counter some stuff, and they target their Ad Libitum in the graveyard. I Chainlink 3 Called by the Grave, targeting the Ad Libitum to banish it, so they're branded in red fizzles, which is incredibly good for me. Anyway, I can make a Mirror Jade using my Albion and my Albaz. I don't need to even go into the Lubellion because I don't want to discard any cards. I've got some stuff that I want to keep for later potentially. Anyway, I go Mirror Jade effect and I send my Titanic Clad for cost so that I can banish something. This is where it gets a little tricky here. My opponent activates Quem, targeting the Albaz in their graveyard to special summon. And this really throws a huge wrench into my play. I completely, I don't know, my brain just melts like it did just there when I was trying to talk. Yeah, so they summon the Albaz, and then it's my turn to choose what I want to banish. I have the huge decision of do I banish the Mirror Jade or do I banish the Albaz. If I banish the Mirror Jade, then they're just going to make another Mirror Jade with their Albaz. So I got to get rid of the Albaz. Albaz is gone. It doesn't get its effect because it's gone before it can even trigger. And I guess it doesn't even matter because if I would have banished after it triggered, it still wouldn't get the effect. Anyway, they activate their Mirror Jade by sending a copy of Rinbrum from their extra deck. And then they banish my Masquerade the Blazing Dragon. They don't want to take any burn damage. That comes up, actually. You'll be surprised. Anyway, I do some crazy things. I normal summon the Edgem Chain. You'd never expect that. Activate the Polymerization. I wanted 2 monsters on my board with my Ad Libitum in my hand so that I could make a Guardian Chimera with 2 mats on board, 1 in my hand. So I can draw 1 and blow up 2 things on their side of the field. We go Chainlink 1 Chimera, Chainlink 2 Adlib to target the Mirror Jade and special summon it back to my board. There it is. There's the Mirror Jade. We got Mirror Jade number 2. Guardian Chimera draws me a card, and I destroy their copy of Branded Lost, as well as their Guiding Quem the Virtuous. Like I said, I know that they only play once, so if I get rid of it, we're sitting pretty good. Anyway, I go Mirror Jade New Chain. I send my Albion for cost to banish their copy of Mirror Jade. They activate their Mirror Jade effect, of course, in the so that they can blow up my board in the end phase. I drew the Albion, so I activate Albion, sending the Retribution, putting it on the bottom of the deck, so I can draw one card. And luckily for me, I'm just so good at Yu-Gi-Oh! And I draw the Fusion Deployment, I activate it, I reveal the Grand Guignol so I can special summon the Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous. I'm just going off. I'm going crazy right here. However, there's one thing that could have won me the duel here. I don't win the duel. Spoiler alert right here. This is where I could have won it if I could have done one thing. Anyway, I used the Cartesia effect to fuse Albaz and herself to make Grand Guignol. If that was a Albion the Sanctifier Dragon, I win the game this duel, or this turn. But it's not. It's a Grand Guignol. I don't have Sanctifier in my deck. That 3,000 attack points would have been enough. Regardless, I punch for a ton of damage. They go down to 400 life points, and then I pass. Now we have some crazy end phase shenanigans that I really am excited to talk about because there's some interesting things going on here. I activate Cartesia to add it to my hand. Then I go Albion effect to set a branded spell or trap, which happens to be branded in red. And then I pass my turn over. This is kind of the moment of truth. I don't really know where I should be activating this branded in red. It's a little rocky. I probably should have started doing it right on the summon of Aluber instead of getting the branded fusion, but here we are. I set it, or I still have it set, and I keep it held. They do the Aluber, search branded fusion effect to make a Lubellion, and I decide to chain a Rinbrum here. This is really where I should have started doing some stuff before. And I guess now I know. Before they get their fusions going, in future games, I'll know that that's what I need to do. Anyway, some crazy things happen. I do the Rinbrim, banishing itself to special summon the Albaz. They resolve the Lubellion, making a Mirror Jade on their side of the field. I activate Albaz effect, sending Cartesia for cost. They chain link to their Mirror Jade, and I have to respawn with my branded red, targeting my ad libitum, and it doesn't super work out well. If I make something with branded in red, then they're just going to banish it with the Mirror Jade. So I just keep the ad libitum in my hand. They banish the Albaz. Albaz effect doesn't go through. They have game on board right here, but to my chagrin, they decide, I think that's the right word, chagrin, that sounds right. They fuse with the Cartesian and Mask Boy. Forgive me. Aluber, thank you. Aluber and Cartesia. They fuse them, making a Masquerade. I chain my Grand Guignol in the graveyard by banishing itself to make Quertus. And this is another big F-up. I get so pumped about this. I activate my Quertus effect, paying some more life points for Masquerade. And lo and behold, it affects non-level 8 fusions, which of course is all my opponent has. They swing over my Despian Quertus, and I feel like an absolute fool. They do a ton of damage to me, leave me with 1,300. I do not have a lot of stuff going for me. In the end phase, I add back the Cartesia, which makes me pay another 600 life points. So I literally have one effect for my turn. That said, there's not a lot I could have done anyway at this point. I am kind of just SOL, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I top deck for my turn a copy of Foolish Burial. I could maybe send a Mercurier. That would have been one effect. Mercurier effect would have took me down to 100 life points, and at that point I can't do anything. So getting the Cartesia seemed like the best play, that I could maybe potentially make a fusion by normal summoning Cartesia and fusing for something. But as a result, it doesn't, and that is the game. Very unfortunate ending, but man, I think we both played insane. I thought this duel was so much fun. There were so many little intricacies that I picked up from it that I was able to learn. Interestingly enough, I was so excited to talk about the Magnum Reliever combo, but I don't actually even use the Magnum Reliever combo in this duel. However, I do want to stress that that is a great little combo. Magnum Reliever is a really, really good card for this little build of the deck. Anyway, let's go to our end conversation. Alright, so we're back from locals, and I only wanted to show you just that one duel because I did want to talk about some other things in this ending portion of the video right here. But first, let's quickly talk about how I think the deck actually did and the little additions that I included to the deck and how I think they performed. The first thing that I want to bring up is the Edge Imp Chain package. I think that the Edge Imp Chain package did so dang good. So many good things from this little package for our little build of branded Despia. So much card advantage was gained off of this package. So many different potential fusion possibilities, and honestly, the list goes on. It's super awesome. The fact that they are dark attribute really helps a lot with a lot of that. It does come up. It's not every single time, but the fact that it does come up is super great. It could have been a light target as well, which would have been maybe even better, but regardless, the dark attribute is super good. It being a fiend doesn't really do anything for us, but just the fact it's a body and a normal summonable body at that, as you saw in the duel, it came up. And there's so many little things that come with this. Just the fact that you can send this, grab the Fright for Patchwork, activate that to get another copy of itself. It's just so good. Super good. I'm very happy with how it performed. Anyway, that moves into something that I did with this package that was definitely illegal. I don't know if any of you guys caught it. If you did, you probably already commented it down in the comment section below, but it all revolves around Called by the Grave. In that duel, I activated Call by the Grave to target the ad libitum in my opponent's graveyard to banish it. And by doing so, that would have meant that my ad libitum of Despia was also unable to work. I did use its effect in theory because I used Call by the Grave, not in theory, in practice, in actuality, because I Called by the Grave, targeted the ad lib in their graveyard, banish it. It should have negated all effects of ad libitum of Despia, that card's name, for the rest of my opponent's next turn, or just the end of the next turn. So ad libitum should not have worked. That said, you saw the outcome. I didn't win, so it didn't change too much because I didn't win. Granted, I got some more advantage off of that by getting a second Mirror Jade out. Speaking of Mirror Jade, I want to talk about the end phase. So, I knew that this was going to be coming up, and as soon as I sat down for this branded mirror match, because of the way Mirror Jade works, it can blow up the board in the end phase. If you activate the Mirror Jade effect once it's sent to the graveyard, from your opponent's card effects, then it's a mandatory effect in the end phase that it must resolve, essentially. And this does some very very interesting and unique things as a result. And I want to talk about that because I find it very fascinating. All right, so here on screen, I've got, I guess let's call it the end phase procedures of what happens in the end phase of a Yu-Gi-Oh match. And we're going to talk about how this affects things and how it can affect things and so on. So let's say if I were to have a Titanic Lad in graveyard, and theoretically, let's say I have it in graveyard and I want to summon my Guiding Quem, the Virtuous, to my side of the field in the end phase. And my opponent is trying to resolve their Mirror Jade. Now, they know I've got the Titanic Clad. They know I want to summon the Quem. They don't want me to summon that Quem, so they want to activate their Mirror Jade at the very end. If I'm turn player, then I am able to cheat this system a little bit because of the way this little graph, this procedure works. And we're going to go through it through each step. So the priority is to the turn player. I say I don't have any mandatory or I don't have any effects, optional effects that I want to activate. Do you have any optional effects that you want to activate, opponent? And they can if they'd like to. And then it passes back, the priority passes back to me, and it says, does turn player have any mandatory effects that they would like to activate? I don't, so I pass to my opponent. Do they have any mandatory effects they would like to activate? They do. They do, in fact, have a mandatory effect, being that Mirror Jade to destroy the board. So they destroy the board, and because something changed in the game state, it starts back over and goes back to Turn player, do you have any optional effects you would like to activate? And then I could activate the Titaniclad, summon the Quem to my side of the field. Then my opponent gets their optional effects, and then I get my mandatory effects, and they get their mandatory effects, and then we proceed to actually ending the end phase, or the turn as a whole. It's a little complicated. I've seen it come up before in Master Duel, so I was very curious how it played out there, because it happened, and I was confused on how that all happened in Master Duel, and obviously it just kind of naturally goes in Master Duel. It's really cool to see it in practice on the TCG as well, but I did want to bring that up because of interesting wording and things. However, that does lead me to go to the very next thing that I want to talk about, and it is specifically about hard once per turns versus negating an activation of a card. Let me just grab one more card that I'm thinking about before I talk about it. All right, so this is something that happened in one of my duels that I recorded but just chose not to use for this video. It involved doing this hard once per turn versus negate activation thing. So on the board, my opponent had a copy of Apollousa, Bow of the Goddess, which does read, quick effect, once per chain, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can make this card lose exactly 800 attack, and if you do, negate the activation. So, Apollousa negates the activation of a card. They have it on their side of the field. I normal summon Fallen of Albaz, trying to make it so that I can fuse their Apollousa into a Mirror Jade, because who wouldn't want to do that, to get rid of an Apollousa? They, of course, activate their Apollousa to negate the activation of my Albaz. Me being the bright human being that I am, I activate Fusion Deployment, and then I show a Mirror Jade from my extra deck to summon a second copy of Fallen of Albaz from my deck, with the thought process of, hey, the activation of Albaz was negated, so it never activated. In theory, even though it's a hard once per turn, I should be able to use another Albaz effect as soon as it's summoned, because Albaz's effect never activated. And in some cases, in very, very weird cases, that can be the case. This, however, is not that case. I could not activate Albaz's effect to fuse with their Apollousa. I believe it might have been their last Apollousa negate, which is why I was even doing it. But I digress. And there's one specific reason for this, because of the way this works, and it's because of one tiny word on monster card text. It's typically on monster cards. You might see it sometimes on spell and traps. Sometimes it's not even on monster cards. But let me read it really quick to you all. The very last sentence of Fallen of Albaz reads, "You can only use this effect of Fallen of Albaz once per turn." Fallen of Albaz is named, so it's a hard once per turn. It specifically says you can only use this effect. Use is not activating an effect. So, lo and behold, I could have actually not have activated this second Albaz. In that duel that I did, we was like, oh yeah, Apollousa negates the activation, so yes, of course you could use Albaz effect. So we did end up using that Albaz effect to make the Mirror Jade with their Apollousa. Like I said, that duel, I ended up scrapping it because it was a kind of scuffed duel. Both me and my opponent were making misplays like crazy. It's like we didn't even know what our decks did. That's how bad they were. But that's why I decided not to even include it into this video. And so, with all of that said and out of the way, let me know if there's any other misplays or things that I did wrong in that duel that you just saw, and how I could have improved, or how I could have played better, or how I could have even won. I obviously, like I brought up at the end of that duel, if I would have had Sanctifier, I could have won. I didn't have Sanctifier, plus I did do the little cheaty thing with the Call by the Grave and the Ad Libitum. So I don't know, even with Sanctifier, if I could have won, but I digress. There was that. Yeah, overall, though, I am very happy with how this deck performed. I think it can get better. Obviously, there are some ways it can get better. We've got the branded opening, which would be a great card to include. But there's one specific card that I really, really want so that I can start setting copies of Branded Lost to my side of the field. And it's the Bestial Lubellion. So, next time, we will be opening up some packs. As you saw, we had branded opening in our list of cards to purchase. Granted, I took it out for $5. So, not only do we have just one pack, we also have an entire tin for next time. So 4 packs of 25th anniversary dueling tins of mirrors are here. Oh, mirrors is the new one coming out later. It's the dueling hero, excuse me. We got a whole tin and an extra pack. With that logic, we should get the Lubellion, so stay tuned till next time when we add the dragon that can... I don't got a joke for this one, I'm sorry. See ya.